Welcome back to the June edition of Hunger Games Chronicles, the 136th to 140th Hunger Games. I'm sorry for being a little late on uploading, 2 days late to be precise, but my birthday was on June 15th, so there was trouble and I couldn't find time. Anyways, I'm back, and fasten your seatbelts because your plane is reaching Pan Am in the year 158. The 136 games took place in the year 158 in an arena known as the Asylum for the Mental. It had notable animals, the slithering snakes, contained a virus release, and lasted for 8 days. President Flickerman decided that this year he would invite a new game maker to replace Maya Karyu, despite the success of the 135th Hunger Games. However, Camillus Breen did not fail to disappoint the capital with his very first games as head game maker. This year's victor was an 18-year-old from District 4 named Orca Novak. As the podiums rose into the arena, several of the tributes squealed in fear. Although the couriers shouted at them to be quiet, they themselves could not hide that they were clearly petrified of this arena. Rubius Dalton even recoiled in fear, and Priscilla Price fell out of her chair in fear as citizens slowly moved backwards. They looked around at the eerie halls of this asylum, which had originally been used in order to drive rebels and political enemies of Coriolanus Snow, former president of Panem. Crazy. The eerie hallways passed through numerous rooms with simple white beds. Back in the cornucopia, the only available weapons were syringes filled to the brim with a poisonous drugs, which would kill tributes within seconds if it hit their arteries. It came as no surprise that Orca was slightly wary of this arena, and she nearly fell off of her podium. However, she revealed that her mentor Brooke had told her to breathe and calm down as the countdown slowly decreased towards 0. Orca glanced around for her fellow 5 careers, as the District 7 tributes had decided not to join the Career Alliance this year. Caius from 2 wiggled his pinky finger towards Zephyrus from 5, who was 3 podiums to his left and directly next to Orca. Caius then raised an eyebrow at Orca, and she nodded, glancing at Zephyrus. Meanwhile, Alexis from 2 gave the same signal to Niall from 4, and Prime and Gala from both from 1 gave the same signal to each other. The gong then sounded, and Orca and Caius tackled Zephyrus to the ground, and Caius immediately snapped his neck. Orca then ran into the mouth of the cornucopia and grabbed a syringe, noticing that Niall had just been tackled to the ground by Garner from 9. She launched a syringe through the air and into Garner's back, which caused him to fall onto Niall. He convulsed for several seconds, but Niall pushed him off. The other couriers managed to kill 9 tributes in total during the bloodbath, amusing all of their mentors. The couriers congratulated each other for the success of their plan during the bloodbath, but Orca did not appear to enjoy how happily the others, with the exception of Niall, spoke about their kills. They had all managed to grab syringes from the cornucopia and realized that the syringes contained poisonous drugs. It was also noticed that most of the couriers appeared slightly unsettled by the eerie setting for these games, but they managed to set up a camp for the next 3 days. The pack set up rather elaborate traps, with Caius and Alexis chasing their targets into the couriers' camp, while Niall and Orca hid under the sole bed in this room. When these tributes passed the bed, Orca and Niall would jump up and chase them into the toilet of the room, where Prime and Gala would be waiting to kill them. This plan worked rather effectively, and the couriers had managed to kill 5 other tributes by the end of day 3. As they congratulated each other for how well they were working, Orca pushed Niall aside and whispered that she felt like leaving the courier pack, although Niall dismissed this. Although Orca repeatedly tried to get Niall to leave the pack with her, he refused, and so he and Orca remained in the courier pack, with Rubius Dalton commenting that Orca likely wanted Niall to leave the pack with her, as he was her district partner and a strong ally. On day 5, the pack realized only 7 other tributes, not including them, remained. In the morning, they managed to chase and kill Rob from 12, although Rob managed to slash Gala with his nails. As Prime walked towards Gala to inspect her wound, Orca readied her syringe and walked towards the unsuspecting Caius. As she was about to slam the syringe into the back of his neck, while the others were distracted, Caius spun around. Rubius compared Orca's look to that of a person's look when they saw a ghost as Caius observed her syringe. There was a tense moment of silence as the other couriers looked up, before Orca punched Caius in the face and broke into a run. Caius fell to the ground in pain and massaged his bleeding nose, before shouting at Alexis to kill Orca. Niall appeared to be in 2 minds about this, but he helped Caius to his feet as Alexis knocked Orca out with a single slap to the back of her head. Alexis slumped Orca over her shoulder and asked Caius and Niall what they should do with her. Niall suggested just killing her, while Caius told Alexis that they could have some fun with her. Niall glared at Caius, and when Orca came to her senses, she saw that she had been shackled to a bed that had belonged to an especially insane rebel. Orca shouted for help, but Alexis quickly slapped her and told her that they could make her death even more painful if they wanted to, and that she should be grateful she was still alive. Orca glanced at Niall, but he looked down at his feet as Alexis slowly filled her syringe with a different substance she had found in the bathroom, which Ruby stated to be a torture substance, grinning wickedly at Orca. Orca begged for Niall to help her, but he simply shook his head. Alexis then slammed a syringe into Orca's arm and she shrieked in agony and began shaking, whilst Alexis began singing a song about a place called Downtown. Niall appeared shocked by Alexis's torture of Orca, but he remained quiet as she screamed for her mother. Alexis and Caius both scoffed in amusement as Prime and Gala shared a concerned look, and Alexis increased the amount of the mysterious substance in each dose, making Orca's screams even louder. Alexis then told Caius that she felt she had tested Orca enough, telling Caius he could kill her. Niall helped Caius pick up Orca, but he placed the syringe Alexis had been using in her hands. Niall winked at a groaning Orca as Caius prepared to throw her into the perimeter, but after just 5 seconds, Orca slammed the syringe into Caius's back. He screamed in agony and collapsed to the ground, convulsing. Alexis snarled, but Niall slammed his syringe into her left eye, making her fall into Prime. Both of them fell to the ground as Niall continually stabbed Alexis in the face. Her cannon sounded a few seconds later, before Niall slammed his syringe into Prime's neck, also sounding his cannon. Orca stabbed Caius all over his face, making him roar in pain until his cannon finally sounded, and Niall and Orca looked up to see that Gala had just run away. By day 7, only 4 tributes remained, and so Game Maker Breen announced that a virus would be released into the arena in 20 minutes, and that the only way for tributes to survive would be to take immunity pills from the cornucopia. Orca and Niall failed to remember where the cornucopia was, but they used several old signs around the asylum to reach it. They immediately grabbed their pills, and no tributes were killed during this time. They quickly found a hiding place and rested there, talking about how glad they were to no longer be allies with the psychopaths from 2. Niall told Orca that he planned to kill Gala tomorrow, and Orca agreed that this seemed like the correct thing to do. Dusk soon fell and Niall glanced out the arena, telling Orca that he couldn't believe that rebels had been imprisoned here, but Orca did not respond to him and instead approached him with her syringe. Orca was soon directly behind Niall, and she slammed the syringe towards his shoulder, but he heard her and jolted around, slamming his muscular left arm into the side of her head. She fell to the ground and held a hand to her head, but she managed to grab her syringe again. She lunged it towards Niall and he held up his syringe, blocking her attack. Niall then pushed her backwards, before leaping on her back and repeatedly smacking her head into the ground. Orca painfully managed to get to her feet and kicked Niall in the abdomen, making him gasp in surprise and pain. As he staggered backwards, Orca slammed her syringe into his chest, causing him to fall to the ground in pain, before his cannon sounded and Orca fled the room. Orca appeared rather nervous that night, knowing that the next day would probably be the final day of the games and that she would have to face her opponents. As the sun rose into the sky, a cannon sounded, but Orca did not know who this cannon belonged to. She remembered her 2 remaining opponents, and realized that either Gala or Colby from 10 was her only remaining opponent, although she wished that it would be the latter. Orca then decided to make her way back to the cornucopia, being careful to avoid the snakes as she did so. Just as Orca made her way back to the cornucopia, she ran into a group of snakes, making her shout in fear. The snakes slithered towards her and she took a deep breath, before walking towards them and brandishing her syringe in a threatening manner. The snakes did not seem to care, however, and continued slithering towards her. Orca then growled at them to back off, but she then heard footsteps from nearby. She spun around and carefully approached the direction of these footsteps. She slowly opened the door, but as she was about to run inside, a syringe flew into her arm. Orca dropped her syringe and clutched her arm in pain as Gala ran out from behind the door and pinned Orca to the wall, trying to retrieve her syringe to stab her heart. Orca then let herself fall backwards onto Gala, and both the girls fell to the ground, and they began rolling over each other to try to grab Gala's syringe. Despite the intense pain, Orca managed to yank Gala's syringe from her arm and shoved it into Gala's hand, leaving Gala groaning in pain. Orca then slammed the syringe into Gala's chest, sounding her cannon a few seconds later and leaving Orca the winner of the 136th Hunger Games. Orca fell unconscious after her victory was announced, and it was revealed that several high doses of this drug had been the dangerous drug had been released into her system by Alexis. Orca spent a few months in Ravensthal Hospital, but she ultimately recovered and moved back to District 4, teaching classes in a training academy about pain resistance. The 137th games took place in the year 159 in a misty valley, featuring cuddly bears, a blazing wildfire, and lasting for 11 days. As a capital favorite, this year's victor became well known for using GameMaker manipulation to her advantage. This year's victor was an 18-year-old from District 7 named Evie Dalloway. During her victor's interview, Evie revealed that she had not felt like volunteering this year, but no females from District 7 volunteered this year. She then added that she had volunteered in order for the prize money, which she would use to get treatment for her sick brother. When the gong sounded, Evie ran into the cornucopia and grabbed an axe, before starting a fight with Tesla from 5. As Evie was pushed to the ground by Tesla tried to stab her with a knife, but she swung her axe over her heart, causing Tesla to continually miss her heart. This annoyed Tesla, and she instead aimed her knife for Evie's head, but she swung the axe over her head instead. This continued until Tesla was tacked to the ground by the deadly Larkspur from 12, but she managed to escape. Tesla pursued Evie as she ran up a hill in the valley. Tesla threw her knife at Evie's foot and she screamed in pain, before tumbling down the hill and landing at Tesla's feet. Tesla retrieved her knife from Evie's foot, making her scream even louder. Tesla told Evie she was hard work and tried to stab her, but Evie pushed back with her axe and this made Tesla stumble back. Tesla did not give up and ran towards Evie, but just as Tesla was about to force her knife into Evie's throat, she staggered backwards with an axe in her head, and Ticket from 7 stepped up from her as she fell to the ground and helped Evie up. Ticket and Evie agreed to start an alliance, and they spent a lot of time canoodling at the bottom of the hill. Evie later stated that she wished she could have known Ticket under different circumstances, as he seemed like a rather nice guy, but he knew that it was likely she would have to kill him in the end. Ticket told Evie that he had volunteered for the honor of serving the Branks family, while Evie told him that she had volunteered to get her younger brother treatment for his disease. This seemed to touch Ticket's heart, and he told Evie he would try to help her win. On day 10, Ticket suddenly jolted awake and told Evie that he could see some fire. Evie spun around and told Ticket that he was right, before they began running down the hill. However, Evie tripped and brought Ticket down with her, causing both of them to roll down. Ticket narrowly avoided banging his head on a rock. He then helped Evie to her feet, and they quickly ran away from the fire, before hiding in a thick forest. However, 2 of the career boys soon arrived, having spotted Ticket and Evie fleeing the fire. Cash from 1 and Steele from 2 immediately began laughing as they caught a glimpse of Ticket holding Evie's mouth. Cash then walked toward the tree they were hiding behind, before Steele ran up towards them and leapt in front of Evie and Ticket, shouting, "Surprise!" Cash told Evie that she could say goodbye to her brother as he was about to kill her, but Evie noticed that the fire was slowly catching up to them. Ticket appeared to notice this as well, but Cash and Steele did not. As Steele approached the pair with his swords, Evie headbutted him and he fell to the ground for a second, but then jumped to his feet, although Evie quickly pushed him with all his strength. He roared in surprise, but then his eyes widened in shock as he fell into the fire. Steele's screams were heard by almost all the other tributes as his body was badly burnt. His cannon sounded a few seconds later as Cash and Ticket began a brutal fight with their weapons while trying to jump back from the fire. Cash managed to knock Ticket to the ground, but Evie managed to sneak up behind Cash and she stabbed her axe into his back, but it only knocked him to the ground due to his body armor. Evie then pushed him into the fire as well, and he screamed in pain. Evie and Ticket then escaped the inferno as Cash painfully made his way away from the fire before encountering 2 of the careers, being stabbed by Larkspur. Cash's cannon soon sounded and Evie and Ticket were pleased to see that apart from a cut on Ticket's arm, which had been caused by Cash's knife, both of them were okay and did not have any life-threatening injuries. Although only 5 tributes now remained, neither Ticket nor Evie appeared to want to leave each other. Meanwhile, Larkspur and Manta from 4 began arguing about who had killed Steele, as Larkspur believed this person would be a potential threat. This led to Manta leaving Larkspur, and Larkspur gladly let her go, but slowly followed her from a distance. On the morning of day 11, Manta reached the cornucopia and attempted to steal a trident in order to kill her remaining opponents, but she encountered her district partner, Finnan. The pair engaged in a quick fight, and Larkspur, who had made his way to the cornucopia for a sword, watched as Finnan stabbed Manta in the throat repeatedly with his trident. Although Larkspur was suspicious of Finnan, he agreed to work with him until Ticket and Evie were dead. Manta's cannon rang out over the entire valley, and Ticket woke up, before waking Evie and telling her that they should leave the forest and make their way towards some of the hills. Ticket told Evie that only one could win out of the 4 tributes remaining, but that they still needed to kill the 2 remaining tributes, both of whom were couriers. Ticket and Evie ran through the forest and made their way towards the hills, but as Ticket was climbing up, Finnan threw a rock from down the hill and it smashed against Ticket's head, sending him to the ground as he shouted in pain. Evie shouted out as well as Finnan charged towards the wounded Ticket, but Ticket managed to trip Finnan and he snapped his neck as Finnan tried to flee. Evie then helped Ticket to his feet, but Larkspur then emerged and threw a sword down the hill and into Ticket's heart. He collapsed to the ground in pain, and Evie ran up the hill towards the stone-faced Larkspur. As Larkspur turned to face her, Evie punched him in the face and pushed him down the hill. Larkspur hit his head hard on a rock, and he growled at Evie, who stood directly over him as Ticket groaned beside him. Evie took a deep breath and slammed her axe repeatedly onto Larkspur's head, not stopping even after his cannon sounded. After bashing his head a total of 32 times, Evie glanced at Ticket and walked towards him, saying he would be remembered for his sacrifice. After her victory, Evie returned to District 7 and immediately used up all of her prize money to get treatment for her younger brother, Leaf. She used the little remaining to open a free hospital for children in District 7, and she got married, before having a son, whom she named Ticket after her fallen ally. The 138 games of the year 160 took place in a mountain jungle, featuring stocky gorillas, a volcanic eruption, and lasting for 7 days. After this year's games, it was noticed that all of the career mentors warned their mentees to never try to fool an outlier. This year's victor was a 15-year-old from District 11 named Lotus Castellan. During training, Lotus was approached by the couriers, who asked him if he would like to join their alliance, as they had seen how skilled he was with a sickle and how quickly he had learned to use daggers and swords. Lotus agreed, and his mentor, Antoine, was pleased by his decision. However, the night before the games began, District 11's male district victor, Thibaut Gerardo, approached Lotus and told him that although he might be honored with the decision of the couriers to let him join, he should not trust them. Antoine shot back that Thibaut did not trust couriers because of his experiences back in 112, but Thibaut suddenly pointed to the balcony. As Lotus approached, he heard the tributes from 2 discussing how they planned to kill him after the bloodbath, which enraged him and made Thibaut give him a slight grin. As soon as the gong sounded, Lotus sprinted inwards to grab his sickle, and although he saw his allies waving towards him, he grabbed several daggers and threw them at all 6 of the couriers. They twisted in shock and fell to the ground, and Lotus walked towards them. He quickly retrieved his daggers and finished off some wounded tributes, before placing all his daggers in his pocket as he fled the cornucopia, holding a sickle out at the ready. For the first 4 days, Lotus decided that he would explore as much of the arena as he could, stating that his goal was to place his feet in every single part of this beautiful arena. Lotus followed Gouda and Baron both from 10 on the 4th day, and he grinned when he saw Gouda drinking water from the lake running through the arena. As he was about to drink some himself, he suddenly noticed Gouda gagging. She soon choked to death, and Lotus ran towards Baron, before killing him with his sickle. It was at this moment that Lotus realized the lake contained acid water. On the morning of the 5th day, Lotus woke up and yawned, before staring at the mountain towards the south of the arena. He noticed that it was beginning to tremble slightly, and he slowly scampered backwards just as the volcano erupted and lava flowed down the mountain. Lotus swore and tried to think of how he could run away, but as the lava came closer, he grabbed his knives, sickle, and supplies, before jumping on a rock in the middle of the acid river. He jumped to the other side and ran, narrowly avoiding the eruption, which killed numerous other tributes and left only 7 remaining. As the volcano prepared to erupt again, ash flew from the sky, causing Lotus to swear even louder as the ash caked his bronze skin. He used some of his water to wash off his skin, but as the volcano erupted once more, he spilled some of the water on his green shirt, making him roar in anger as he began running away. Little did he know that Graham and Ebna, both from 9, were following him from a distance, but Lotus did not seem to notice this, and he continued running, much to the delight of Graham and Ebna. As an unsuspecting Lotus hid from the lava behind a tree, Graham approached him from behind and suddenly slammed his elbow into his head, knocking him unconscious, and he fell to the floor with a cry of pain. When Lotus became conscious once more, he noticed that Graham and Ebna were sorting through his weapons and supplies. Lotus shouted obscenities at Graham and Ebna, but they simply laughed, and the latter glanced at Lotus's sickle in admiration, before holding it to his throat and asking him where the other tributes were. Lotus told Ebna he had no idea where the other tributes were, but just as Ebna was about to slash his throat, she suddenly heard a scream from Graham. Neither Graham nor Ebna had realized that several gorillas were creeping up behind the two of them. It appeared that the gorillas meant no harm to the two of them, but when one of them saw the sickle in Ebna's hand, it charged towards Ebna. Lotus continually vomited as the gorillas bit into Ebna and Graham, but he was most disgusted when Ebna was bitten in half before being swallowed in one bite. Lotus watched as Graham shouted in fear and vomited all over the gorilla that had just killed his district hunter, and this annoyed the gorilla. All of the gorillas attacked Graham, and he was bitten repeatedly in the neck, causing him to shake onto the ground. The gorillas then bit him in the head, and his cannon sounded, and Lotus ran away from the gory scene. Lotus marched through the trees and gagged and vomited as the hovercraft retrieved Graham's body, but it was unable to retrieve Ebna's, as she was currently being digested by a large gorilla. As Lotus whispered that he wanted to go home, he received a sponsor gift of fresh water, along with a note from both Thibaut and Antoine, reminding him that he was one of the remaining few tributes and that he could easily win these games. When Horn of Plenty played that night, he mentioned that Graham and Ebna's portraits looked nothing like the bodies that had been received by the hovercraft. The next day was rather uneventful, with the only death occurring being that of Alvaro from 14, after he was killed by the gorillas. But lucky for him, he still had a body to be collected by the hovercraft. This pleased Lotus, and on the night of day 6, he heard some conversation coming from through the trees. He slowly walked towards the source of this noise and saw that Stylus and Copperess, both from 3, were sitting in this stark. Lotus appeared amused to see the pair's incorrect guesses about the location of Lotus and Juliet from 8. Lotus snuck up behind Stylus and Copperess, and he took a deep breath before slamming his sickle into the back of Copperess's neck. It was noticed that Lotus squeezed his eyes shut as he did so, as if he did not want to kill her. She gasped in pain for a second before pitching forward onto Stylus. He gasped as Copperess struggled to breathe, before her cannon sounded a few seconds later. Stylus glared at Lotus as he pushed Copperess's body away from him. Lotus told Stylus that he had no intention of harming him, but that he needed to know where Juliet was. However, Stylus replied that he had no idea where Juliet was, as he had just been making conversation with Copperess. Lotus then sighed, before apologizing and throwing one of his daggers into Stylus's head, causing him to fall backwards, his cannon sounding immediately, and Lotus retrieved his knife and ran. He ran out to the forest and rested on the edge of a cliff. Antoine appeared annoyed by this, stating that Lotus could die if he woke up on the wrong side of the bed, which caused him and Thibaut to start fighting. Shortly after Horn of Plenty played that night, however, Lotus was awoken by the sound of a knife landing directly next to his head, and he awoke to see Juliet making her way towards him. Lotus was utterly unprepared, and he asked Juliet if she could come back at a better time, as it was 12 a.m. and he was incredibly tired. This amused Juliet, and she let out a tiny smile before telling Lotus that she had to win. Lotus nodded and quickly prepared himself for this fight. Lotus blocked Juliet's first attacks with his sickle, and she groaned, but lunged towards his head instead. Lotus threw his sickle in front of his head, blocking the knife once more. He then slammed it into Juliet's throat, and as she staggered backwards, she tripped and fell off the cliff, her cannon sounding barely a second later. After Lotus's victory, Antoine and Thibaut began a rivalry over who had helped Lotus win, as Antoine had sent him a note to keep going, whilst Thibaut had told him to abandon their careers. Despite this, Lotus kept a good relationship with both men, and also became friends with Thibaut's wife Begonia, as well as their daughter Daisy and their younger son Logan. The 139th games of the year 161 took place in flooded paddies. They featured annoying tree frogs, a feast, and lasted for 11 days. This year's victor was well known in the capital for managing to terminate some of her opponents by being stealthy, proving that stealth can help tributes. Unfortunately, she was a rather hated winner for her actions during the games. This year's victor was a 17-year-old from District 5 named Danielle Claymore. As the podiums rose into the arena, the first thing Danielle noticed was that the arena was mainly water-based. Luckily for her, she had worked in a hydraulic power plant before being reaped, and so she knew how to swim. When the gong sounded, Danielle made eye contact with her district partner, a 12-year-old boy named Hydro, and they both ran inwards to grab some water. Just as Danielle was about to snatch a bottle that had just been dropped, Thames from 4 tackled her to the ground and tried to stab her with his knife. But just then a spear that had been aimed for Titus from 2 went flying past and impaled itself in Thames's back, coming close to hitting Danielle. Thames fell forwards and Danielle grabbed his knife and water bottle before running. Danielle then dove into one of the nearby rice paddies as Hydro leapt over a terrace to flee the bloodbath. On day 3, Danielle observed Plank from 7 and Kelsey from 8 trying to get some frogs together so that they could kill and eat them. Danielle swam through the water towards them and heard Plank shouting that they should set some traps. This gave Danielle an idea, and she spent 2 more days rationing her water and creating spring traps with sticks in order to kill some of her opponents. Her plan worked, and she managed to eliminate 5 tributes by day 4, making her extremely happy, and she could be seen beaming as she saw the faces of her victims at midnight. The couriers decided that it would make sense if they targeted Danielle, but whenever she saw Titus and the others approaching, she would hide underwater. On day 4, while Titus and the others came extremely close to her hiding spot, Danielle stayed underwater a little too long, and she gasped for breath and resurfaced without realizing that the couriers were still there. Danielle winced as soon as she noticed the couriers, and she turned to run, but she was grabbed by Titus, although she slammed her foot into his groin, causing him to fall. Venia from 2 was annoyed by how easily he fell, and she snarled, before sprinting towards Danielle, who was now jumping from terrace to terrace. However, Venia accidentally stepped on one of Danielle's traps and a stick flew towards her. Venia shouted in pain as the stick hit her head, and she accidentally stepped on another trap, causing a sharpened stick to fly into her stomach. Venia dropped to the ground as her stomach began bleeding, and she shouted obscenities at Danielle, but Danielle calmly walked over to her and smirked, before pushing Venia off the terrace. She screamed as she fell directly into the water, and her cannon sounded seconds later, and Danielle ran away, although she was now being targeted by Titus. Over the next few days, Danielle simply rested and set more traps across the arena, killing 2 more tributes, including one of the couriers. On day 7, she was eating some bread she had received from sponsors when she heard a cry of pain. She climbed up 4 terraces to the source of this noise. She saw her 12-year-old district partner, Hydro, and Cutter from 10, lying on the floor after Hydro had been hit in the leg with a sharpened stick from one of Danielle's traps, and Cutter had been right behind Hydro when he fell over. Danielle helped Hydro and Cutter to their feet, before asking them if they were okay. Hydro said that he was fine, but needed a bandage. A sponsor gift floated down to them, and Hydro placed a bandage over his wound as Danielle told him about the traps she had set and how she had already killed 2 of the couriers. The 3 of them agreed to stick together for a while, and on the 8th day, they awoke to the sound of Game Maker Breen announcing that a feast would take place in 20 minutes and that the remaining 10 tributes might like to see what was in their bag. The trio quickly leapt over the terraces and made their way back to the cornucopia, where there was plenty of food. Hydro and Cutter agreed that they would run towards the cornucopia to grab some food, with Danielle killing tributes that got near to them with her knife. Although Cutter agreed with this, he made Danielle promise that she would cover both of them and not just Hydro, making Danielle scoff, but she agreed. Hydro then sprinted inwards to grab a loaf of bread, ignoring Titus, who was approaching him from behind with a machete at the ready. Danielle failed to realize this as she watched Cutter grab a side, and he shouted Hydro's name and sprinted towards Titus, slamming his sight into Titus's arm. The boys fell to the ground and began dueling with their weapons as Hydro grabbed the bread, but he became too optimistic and ran to the a water bottle before being tackled to the ground by Pika from 12. Danielle immediately threw her knife through the air and into Pika's head, but as she fell to the ground, Titus gained the upper hand on Cutter. Hydro slowly got to his feet and shouted Danielle's name, telling her that they needed to help Cutter, who was bleeding from a cut in his arm from Titus's machete. Danielle looked at Cutter and back at Hydro, before shaking her head and beginning to run. Hydro followed her, although he was clearly not happy. As for Cutter, he managed to put up a strong fight and push Titus off of him, before stabbing him in the neck with his side. The number of remaining tributes dropped from 10 to 6, as Cutter managed to kill some more tributes at his side, as they made their way towards the cornucopia to grab their feast bags. Hydro asked Danielle why she had not saved Cutter, not knowing that he was still alive. And Danielle told him that only one could win the Hunger Games, and that it was important that they try to survive and not worry about their allies. Hydro did not exactly share the same sentiments as Danielle, but she gave him a hug and he appeared to agree with her, before sharing some of his bread with her. The next morning 2 cannons sounded, due to Cutter having managed to hunt down and kill Kelsey and Zip, both from 8. Danielle taught Hydro how to set some more spring traps. Although Danielle was clearly thinking about killing Hydro, she decided to spare him, as he was only 12 and as she knew him back in 5. After setting a total of 8 traps, Danielle and Hydro decided to rest for the night. But Hydro stated that he was going to keep watch and make sure the traps were properly fixed. Danielle appeared confused but let Hydro do so. Horn of Plenty soon played, and Danielle yawned when she woke up early in the morning, but saw that Hydro had still not returned from his inspection. Danielle called out Hydro's name and she heard a cry of pain, followed by a cannon as she sprinted down the terraces to see that Cutter had just thrown his sight into the back of Hydro's neck a few meters away. Hydro fell to his knees and and his body pitched forwards, and Cutter grinned at Danielle, before telling her that next time she should think twice before betraying her extremely strong ally. The pair engaged in a duel with their weapons, and Danielle managed to push Cutter down the terrace while she whimpered at Hydro's body. Cutter hit his head on the ground, but he managed to get to his feet before running away. When Horn of Plenty played again that night, Danielle could be seen smoldering as Hydro's portrait was shown. She repeatedly shouted obscenities at the Capitol and had to be censored the entire night, as she refused to stop insulting President Flickerman and the rest of the Capitol. This annoyed citizens, and Danielle immediately stopped receiving sponsor gifts, which angered her even more. On the morning of the next day, all the remaining 3 tributes were told to return to the cornucopia or have their trackers detonated. And when Danielle entered the cornucopia, she saw Cutter fighting Sly from 1, with Cutter immediately slamming his sight into Sly's throat. Danielle then warded the sight of Cutter and jumped on his back, catching him by surprise. She then threw him to the ground, and as he tried to reach for his sight, which was still in Sly's throat, Danielle smacked his head repeatedly into the ground until his cannon sounded and Rubius Dalton grudgingly announced Danielle as the winner. Her victor's interview was a complete disaster, as she refused to answer any of Rubius's questions and even spat on him. This enraged Rubius as well as the audience, and they threw vegetables at Danielle, making her laugh, stating that if this made them happy, they should do that, much to the annoyance of President Flickerman. Danielle then pushed Rubius to the ground, and her disrespect of the 81-year-old man caused her to be hit on the back of the head by a peacekeeper, while Rubius was so angry and humiliated that he quit his job as a commentator, leaving it to a cheerful young lad named Maxwell Christie, who was 19, a rising star in the Capitol due to his culinary talents. Priscilla Price also resigned from her role as a commentator, leaving young lady the same age as Maxwell, Ariel McKinnon, a girl from District 4 and the daughter of an influential trader, to take over Priscilla's role. Meanwhile, due to the problems Danielle had caused during the victor's interview and throughout the games, President Flickerman had no choice but to take action against her psychologically. Because of this, as soon as Danielle returned to District 5, she was forced to watch her mother and sister get executed. This made her hate Flickerman even more, and she became a slight alcoholic due to the loss of her family. The 140th games of the year 162 were the 13th quinquennial Quell. For this year's Quell, Flickerman announced that in order to remind the rebels that part of their downfall was due to their constant bickering, 2 boys and 2 girls will be reaped from each district before fighting to the death, and the remaining boy and girl of each district will be their district's representatives for the 140th Games. This amused viewers who believed that this was like a mini 100 Hunger Games. This year's victor was a 14-year-old from District 14 named Reina Valdez. Reina protested against this quell twist from her zone in District 14, which had once been Santa Clara, but she was even more angry when she was reaped to fight against a girl named Alida, and quickly won this fight, despite Alida being several years older, while Ivan Gonzalez won his mini-games by accidentally crushing his opponent Wilfredo with a rock. This year's games took place in an arena known as the Labyrinth of the Minotaur, featuring an animal known as the Minotaur, a sonic surge, moving walls, and lasting for 13 days. As the podiums rose into the arena, Reina saw that she was trapped between 2 hedges and could not see other tributes. However, the hedges formed a path directly towards the center of the arena, where only small golden daggers were present. Reina appeared slightly annoyed by the lack of a variety of weapons, but she saw the many pots ahead of the central circle and decided that she would run towards the pot. The gong immediately sounded, but just as Reina was about to grab a dagger, the wall next to her moved in front of her and she had to make a detour. The walls kept moving as she ran, but she managed to make it to the central circle and grabbed a dagger, before running up behind Naomi from 12 and stabbing her in the back of the head with her dagger. She tried to find Ivan but was unable to do so, before she was pushed to the ground by Rifle from 2, who tried to stab her with his knife. However, Ivan launched his dagger from the other side of the central circle and hit Rifle in the arm, causing him to yelp. Reina grabbed the dagger from his arm before turning and running. As Reina fled, she suddenly realized that she had dropped a water bottle she had kept in her pocket, and she groaned. And as she groaned, she spun around to see Catal from 5 approaching her with her water bottle, which she had picked up. Reina appeared suspicious of Catal, but she agreed to start an alliance with him, and they spent the next 2 nights taking turns to sleep and keep watch. On day 3, it appeared that they had built up a strong rapport, but they were extremely hungry and walked through the labyrinth in an attempt to find food. Over the next couple of days, Reina and Catal tried to find a source of food, but they were appalled when they spotted a beast from a type of mythology from a culture known as Greek, known as the Minotaur, eating Consus from 9 on day 5, despite his cannon having already sounded. Catal threw his dagger at the Minotaur, but this did not appear to hurt it at all, and so it instead ran after the pair, causing them to scream as they ran. The new commentator, Maxwell Christie, told his fellow commentator, Ariel McKinnon, that the 2 of them looked like kids running through the snow. The Minotaur gained on Reina and Catal as it lunged towards Catal, trying to bite him. Luckily for them, the walls moved, causing the Minotaur to get trapped. Reina and Catal paused for a second, but the Minotaur then burst through the walls, making them scream even louder. They ran for 10 minutes, before Reina complained that her feet were hurting and Catal shouted that if they did not find any shelter, her entire body would be hurting, as she would be bitten repeatedly like the Minotaur. As they ran, the Minotaur roared, making Reina shriek as Catal told her to run as fast as she could. Catal then paused, telling Reina he would hold off the Minotaur and give her time to run. Reina then shouted at Catal that she wanted him to survive as well, but Catal shouted back that they would die anyway and that he would try to get her to survive. Reina shook her head, but it was too late and Catal sprinted towards the Minotaur, shouting, "Over here!" Reina shouted for Catal to stop, but the Minotaur was already making its way towards him and it opened its mouth. Reina shook her head, but she decided she would not want Catal's sacrifice to be in vain, and so she turned around and began to run as Catal was attacked by the Minotaur and was bitten in the right leg, causing him to scream. Miraculously, Catal managed to escape the Minotaur after the wall trapped it outside. He managed to slowly crawl away, but this wall was much thicker, and it took the Minotaur several seconds to rip it open. But by then, Reina had helped Catal to his feet and they were hobbling away, with Reina gagging as she saw a large chunk of flesh missing from Catal's right calf. Catal was moaning from the pain, and Reina told him that if she won, she would never forget what he had done for her. Catal laughed, before telling her that she was not helping his optimism, but they managed to hobble into a tunnel. After a couple of minutes of hobbling, they tripped and fell to the ground, with Catal jarring his arm on a rock. But as he shouted out, Ivan walked out from the opposite direction and helped Catal up, before Catal's district partner, Metrica, embraced him and asked him what had happened to his leg. Reina and Catal explained what had happened as Ivan lit a match to examine the wound, and Metrica used a bandage to cover it, although this bandage was not long nor wide enough to cover what had once been his right calf. Reina, Ivan, and Metrica brainstormed ideas of how they could help Catal and stop his bleeding. But a sponsor gift floated down to them, revealing some water, a clot, and an antibiotic cream. Reina washed his wound with the water, whilst Ivan rubbed a clot over it. Once the wound was dry, Metrica spread the cream all over his wound and placed an even bigger bandage over it. As Catal passed out, Metrica whispered that it was unlikely he would be able to recover, although Reina refused to believe it, saying she would make sure he survived. Metrica took a deep breath before telling Reina that Catal was trying to redeem himself for what he had done after being reaped. When Reina asked what Catal had done, Metrica told her that he felt guilty for killing a 12-year-old boy who had been his opponent. Reina nodded, but then replied that Catal had simply been trying to survive and should not be punishing himself for that. The three of them then spoke about their fights before being announced as a tribute, with Ivan feeling genuinely sorry that he had bumped into the boulder that had crushed Wilfredo, whilst Metrica spoke about how she had snapped her opponent's neck after her opponent insulted her boyfriend, who had died in a previous games 2 years ago. Reina spoke about how she had pummeled Aleida to death, and Ivan muttered that Aleida was the cockiest girl in Sector G that he knew. Reina replied that it did not justify killing her, but just then Catal woke up and shouted that he had a nightmare about killing the boy who had been his opponent. Metrica comforted him, and Reina told him that he should not be punished for trying to survive. Catal nodded slowly before saying he wished he had not been raped. He then fell asleep once more, and Reina, Ivan, and Metrica took turns sleeping and keeping watch over a wounded Catal until day 9, when they were awoken by Game Maker Breen, announcing that a sonic surge would be released from the cornucopia in 10 minutes, and that the Minotaur had begun reproducing, and that its offspring would begin chasing the tributes back to the cornucopia, where they could grab earmuffs to protect themselves from the surge. Reina threw Catal over her shoulder, and she immediately tried navigating through the walls and tunnels to get to the cornucopia, but became frustrated when she realized that she could not navigate the tunnels. Ivan tried to get Reina to calm down, but she shouted that the game makers were making it difficult for the tributes for their own amusement. Just then, one of the Minotaur's offspring lunged towards Ivan, knocking him to the ground. As it was tiny, the offspring did not cause that much harm, and instead bit deep into Ivan's arm, which made him scream as he tried to fight it off. Reina screamed Ivan's name, before slamming her dagger into the offspring's head again and again, until it slumped forwards, dead. Chaos then broke out as the quartet remembered that they had to get to the cornucopia, while Ivan observed a timer in the sky, showing that only 5 minutes remained. Ivan swore and began climbing up the hedge, hoping to jump from hedge to hedge towards the cornucopia, but he hit an invisible barrier and was thrown backwards. More offspring made their way towards the quartet, but they did not give up and continued to run, while more and more tributes grabbed earmuffs from the cornucopia and fled. They continued to run as the game makers manipulated the walls to stop them. This infuriated Reina, but Catal managed to get up and he peered over the hedges, shouting directions at Reina, until they managed to reach the cornucopia with 2 minutes left until the sonic search was due to begin. Ivan shouted that he would cover the other 3 members of his alliance with the sword he had been gifted from sponsors. The others agreed to this plan, and Reina immediately grabbed 2 earmuffs, one for her and one for Catal. Reina immediately placed the earmuffs over Catal's ears in order to protect him from the surge. Several more seconds passed as more and more tributes made their way into the cornucopia to grab their earmuffs. As Marcia from 2 attempted to grab hers, Raleigh from 6 sprinted towards her and pushed her to the ground. Marcia shouted as Raleigh grabbed 2 sets of earmuffs, placing one of them over her ears. By now, only 17 seconds remained until the surge was due to begin, and it was obvious that Marcia was panicking. Ivan ran to grab his earmuffs, but Raleigh threw Marcia at him, knocking both of them to the ground. Raleigh then stabbed Ivan in the heart with her knife, before she turned and ran. Reina prepared to run with Catal after grabbing their earmuffs, although she turned around and screamed when she saw Ivan's body, and Maxwell appeared amused that all this had happened while Catal was unconscious. Reina glanced helplessly at Marcia, who was shouting obscenities at Raleigh, who was running away with all the remaining earmuffs. Metrica managed to flee after grabbing one of the earmuffs from Raleigh. Reina pushed her hands against her ears and pushed her feet against Catal's as a booming sound came from the cornucopia, spreading through the maze. Reina gagged as she saw Marcia convulsing terribly, looking like she was about to blow up. Marcia then blew up, and Reina winced as she saw as nothing remained of the muscular girl from District 2 except for the blood now splattering the hedges. Catal finally woke up, and once the surge was over, he and Reina removed their earmuffs. Reina was extremely tired, and for once their roles were reversed, with Catal keeping watch over Reina as she slept for a long time. Reina slept for a total of 48 hours, and although Catal was still recovering from his wound, he did not sleep during these 2 days and loyally watched over Reina until it began snowing on the morning of the 12th day. Reina and Catal immediately began shivering, but Catal offered Reina his coat and she smiled at him before putting it on and rubbing her arms together as a cannon boomed out, belonging to Metrica, after she had been found and killed by rifle. This left just 4 tributes remaining, among which were Reina and Catal. She appeared tempted to kill him with her daggers, but she did not do so after he offered her his coat, although he was clearly shivering himself. They then exchanged stories about their lives back in the districts. They were gifted with sleeping bags by sponsors, and they hid in these for the rest of the day and throughout the night of day 12. When they woke up on the morning of day 13, the hedges began collapsing and nearly hit Catal, although Reina pulled him back at the last second. Catal shouted that the game makers were trying to coerce the remaining 4 tributes back into the cornucopia. They both grabbed their daggers, and Catal managed to hobble away, but he tripped and Reina put him on top of her shoulders again. After a few minutes, they made it back to the cornucopia, and as Reina was about to run toward the dagger that was remaining on the ground, but just as she did so, a cannon rang out. Reina looked around, but just then Catal fell off her shoulders and onto the ground, revealing a dagger in the back of his head that had been thrown by Rifle. Reina gasped as she glared at Rifle, who was now running towards her with another one of his daggers. Rifle prepared to throw the dagger at Reina, but Raleigh suddenly punched him in the back of the head and he fell to the ground in pain. Raleigh then prepared to stab Rifle, but the offspring of the Minotaur ran toward the 2 of them, making Raleigh scream. She abandoned the snarling Rifle and winced as Rifle was bitten repeatedly in the throat by the offspring, sounding his cannon almost immediately. Raleigh, however, did not notice Reina slowly creeping up on her, and he was immediately stabbed in the back of her neck. Reina continually stabbed her until her cannon sounded, leaving her as the first ever victor of District 14. After her victory, Reina became a capital favorite and became a hero in District 14, due to her being the first ever victor. Although she felt guilty for not being able to save Catal, she lived a very fulfilling life and became a zookeeper, specializing with tiger moths. She suggested that a training academy be built in this district, as the tributes would have knowledge of mutations, but this idea was later shot down, much to Reina's annoyance. Later that year, however, a group of people who had been investigating President Flickerman found several files, as well as video recordings, audio recordings, computer printouts, and witness statements in his office, which stated that he was working with several members of the Arabic Empire to start a rebellion in Panem and send a missile, but as they ran in to arrest Flickerman, he shot the missile from its position in the ocean. Silica Creans was called in to help, and she managed to hack into the missile flight plan and was annoyed that it had already been launched. Although these rebels were notorious hackers, Silica was from District 3 and a former victor, and so she managed to stop the missile from destroying the capital and managed to hack into the piloting system before sending it back to the Atlantic Ocean where it had been launched. However, Panem still needed a new president, and there were 72 candidates, although they were soon eliminated until only 2 remained. Cordelia Cardew, a 20-year-old fashion designer who had graduated from the McLean School of Design, and Rusius Malmsey, a 35-year-old wrestler. However, during their debates, Malmsey insulted Cardew, as there had been no female presidents yet, but Cardew shot back by saying, "Just because you have a censored doesn't mean you have to be a censor," which quickly won her the election. And after ordering President Flickerman to be killed, Cardew, along with her husband Josephus and newborn son Justice, moved to the president's mansion. And that is the end of games 136 to 140.